Welcome to another episode of Soul Sessions with Deborah and Rob Maldonado. We are excited to share our summer series, a new season based on the spiritual principles of the wisdom traditions. So let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah.
What do we have in store?
It's finally come around, it's time to really delve into the wisdom traditions and to talk about how we see them, what they have to offer people that are interested in the mind. Of course, our approach is not a religious one. We see these writings and these teachings as important documents that talk about man's and humans' early understanding of consciousness. And they wrote it down in very clear, concise ways.
Well, at first they didn't write it down. They told stories, right? And
That's true.
So these are thousands of years old, these teachings.
Yes, and they're still relevant today. If you notice, yoga is so prevalent around the world now. It's one of the schools that emerged out of those wisdom traditions.
So our sources are the Upanishads, the Bhagavad Gita, Adi Shankara, Buddha, Swami Vivekananda, who came to the U.S. in the late 1800s and brought Eastern philosophy to the Western world. I know Jung was very influenced by Eastern philosophy. A lot of his work later on, not the early personality work, but more when he started getting into individuation later in his career, he realized that there's a self, this nature of us that's beyond the personal. And so it all fits together in the whole package. And one of the things that we love about the Eastern traditions is that, we do the coach training, Jungian life coach training, and the top level, the third level, is our spiritual teacher training, where we really start to focus on these principles in a deep, profound way, and where you start to see the world very differently than when you first came in. So today's episode, the title is, Are Your Desires Destructive or Creative? And so we're going to talk about the nature of desire, because as human beings, we all have desires. Do you have any desires, Rob?
It all starts with desire. Essentially, it is the seed of action. Therefore, it is like a primal element that we all have to deal with.
So we have to always move. We have to always act. Yeah. So we always have desire with us. And so how do we work with desire? One of the stories that I read in this book called Jnana Yoga by Swami Vivekananda, he did a lot of lectures and very practical teachings, and he would tell stories. And one of the stories was of this man, and think about 200 AD, that is in this small village, and he doesn't have much, and he goes to the guru in town, and he says, I would love a genie. I hear there's these genies that you can get, and they can give you anything you desire. And the guru is like, trying to talk him out of it. You really don't want the genie. He's like, yeah, I do. I really do. And he's like, no, you're not ready for the genie. You really shouldn't have the genie. It could be very dangerous. And he said, no, I really want the genie. He's like, okay, but beware. You have to always give it something that you want, or it's going to eat you up and destroy you. And so the guy's like, I have plenty of things I want. I'll keep that genie busy forever. So he said, okay. So he gets the genie, and the genie's like, what do you want? And he's like, well, I think I want a bigger house. So he gets a bigger house. I want the most beautiful woman in the town, the country. He gets a beautiful wife. He has beautiful kids. And he says, I want to be the king of this country. And then he just got all these material desires satisfied. And after a while, he was like, I'm pretty satisfied. I'm the king. I have this beautiful wife. I have a family. I have a beautiful house, servants. I have everything I need. So the genie's like, tell me something else you want. Tell me something else you want. And he's like, I don't want anything else. I have everything. He's like, if you don't give me another thing to desire, I am going to eat you and destroy you. And he's like, oh no. And then so it turned into a monster, and it was chasing him around, and he was trying to find the guru. And he said, oh my God, Guru, please save me from this genie. And the guru was like, well, I told you shouldn't have. I told you the genie is dangerous. And he said, please tell me what to do. I don't want the genie to eat me. I can't think of anything else I want. And he said, well, get a dog's tail, a curly dog's tail, cut it off, and give it to the genie. And so he did, and he's like, okay. And so he gave it to the genie, and he said, instruct the genie to straighten out that tail. And so the genie would go and straighten out the tail, smooth it all out, and then the tail would curl up again. And then the genie he'd say, straighten it out again. And then he gave the genie something to do, and then the genie didn't eat him. So what's the moral of the story? Don't order a genie.
That's right. Desire is never fulfilled. Mm-hmm. It's always a process going on. And that it's insatiable. Basically, that you will never be satisfied through the senses.
Through the external desires. There's always this, you have the best marriage, but then you want more. And we experience this in our everyday life. We might not have a mansion or a kingdom, but we have things in our life that we feel satisfied with. And then we always feel like there's more. There's something else that like there's this, even when we have everything we want, there's a dissatisfaction. I think when COVID happened, I think people were, all the comforts of the world were taken away. All the things that they thought gave them meaning and connection were taken away. And we really were forced to ask ourselves, what do we want? And I think a lot of the anxiety that people have, the kind of the post-COVID anxiety, comes from people don't know what to do with their desires. It's like they're still caught up in that dissatisfaction.
And of course, the whole ethos of the Western mindset is that if you find the right things to consume, if you possess the right things, you will find happiness. The pursuit of happiness is through the materialistic understanding of the universe. And of course, that's the whole idea in the Upanishads, that it's saying, you cannot and will not find happiness through sensory experiences. And
maybe temporary joy, but not lasting happiness.
That's right. And it's not, let's say, it's not saying you can't enjoy life. On the contrary, it explains how you can enjoy life through non-attachment, through understanding what the senses are, what kind of experience are they giving you, and how to understand that experience without getting caught up in it. In other words, without the experience dominating your mind.
So what do you think the cause is of this? We all have this, everyone thinks they're the only ones that feel not enough. But that sense of not enough, what do you think the cause, how would you describe the cause of that not enoughness? Because we can all relate to that. Like, this isn't enough. I'm not enough. I still have to be better.
Yeah, I would say what we know about the mind is that its primary objective is to survive. Mm-hmm. So for survival, it works really well because once you find something to eat and you find some shelter and water, you're temporarily satiated, meaning you're satisfied, but then the desire arises again, meaning it prompts you to find more food, to find shelter again, to find water again, to continue, in other words.
Well, it's almost like that idea that the material world, the Maya that we're in, is always changing. It's always temporary. Yeah. So anything you acquire gets old, gets consumed. Even your body, you got to keep feeding it. You have to work out. You have to keep making money. You can't just like get a pile of money and you have to spend it to keep going. And so there's that kind of temporariness, the temporary nature to our reality that feeds that.
Yeah, absolutely.
That never enough. It's never solid. We're chasing.
Right, because otherwise, once you obtain your desires, you would be done, essentially. You could rest, and that would be death.
And we all think that, though. We all think that, I know there was a time when I first started doing this work and having my own business and working with you, I was like, oh, one day, everything's going to work out and we'll be, set. And, there's this place somewhere where we have all our desires met. Like I would look at people that were more successful and be like, wow, they must feel like so relaxed now. But it doesn't lead to that. It doesn't lead to any kind of satisfaction when you're dealing with, like you said, the external sense pleasures. Those milestones in our life are never satisfied because we age and people leave and things change all the time. There's no island that's peaceful that we could just rest on and cruise through life. I think that's this idea people think there is a place like that. Is that the cause of the suffering? Is that we think there's another place that will be finally satisfied?
Well, so let's think in levels, right? If you are at that basic survival level, the idea is that the external object is going to help you survive, and that's correct. It will help you survive. But when that is augmented and people believe that it's not only going to help me survive, it's also going to make me happy and wise and peaceful. That's the problem right there, because that's not how the mind is designed. The prompting is simply for survival, not for higher aspirations.
So you're in the level of survival is one level.
You're acting out of survival, but you're thinking that you're acting out of higher needs, right? And that the obtaining of objects in the world, material objects, is going to fulfill you somehow at those higher levels.
That new car smell? Is that what you're talking about?
That's right.
Or that new house, or that vacation you go on. We know that people have more joy the day before their vacation while they're on their vacation.
That's right. So the Buddha says there's always this dissatisfaction. It's like the little pebble in the shoe, that even when you have everything, you're still dissatisfied. And you see it with these millionaires and billionaires that, they have everything in the world, but yet they're always searching for something else. Like they got to get the biggest rocket now, and they got to get something else, something bigger, because that's
the biggest rocket. Who are you talking about?
Well,
my rocket's bigger than your rocket.
I mean, exactly. They go back to kind of a childish approach to life. This kind of playing out of the same instinctual patterns that are there in the ego.
So would that also be why we have climate change and we're using all our Earth's resources because of this ego desire to consume and like build more and be more and like attain more.
That's essentially
take over countries.
The formulation that is explained in the Upanishads is precisely that it's a misperception of what the nature of material existence is. We're born into the world and automatically we start to desire things for survival, which is correct. There's nothing wrong with that. But because the large brain that we have, we also have imagination and this cultural layer of existence in our human nature. So we project that desire onto these bigger concepts. That if I get social status, if I get the money, the prestige, the respect, that will somehow increase my happiness. But we know that's not true. Even in current psychological research, we know obtaining more material and accumulating more stuff, more money, does not increase happiness. It plateaus, it flattens out after a certain point. Meaning,
if you're doing it solely for the materialist.
Yeah, we'll talk about what it recommends in place of that. But yeah, if you're doing it for survival, which is what the primary objective is, then it plateaus out after you've gotten enough to survive.
Like 70,000 a year or something, they say. That's like the level of, if you make over 70, the people that are in poverty, yes, if you go from poverty to making, a good wage and you can take care of yourself, your happiness will increase, but it stops at around that 70,000.
Yes,
US
and it
dollars.
flattens out,
Yeah.
and so the money line can keep on going up, increasing infinitely, pretty much in capitalism. But the happiness line will flatten out, meaning you will not increase your happiness, your peacefulness, your wisdom, if you continue to accumulate.
Well, it's almost like we are conditioned to operate from a deficit model where we don't feel we're coming from that not enough. Initially, like our action is, I don't have enough food, I'm going to eat. I don't have, enough shelter. I got to, I'm not making enough money. I'm not getting enough love. And that lack mentality feeds that desire. But then because you don't desire something unless you feel you are absent of it.
That's right. Yeah.
And that's a misperception.
Right. And now the misperception then is amplified through the media. If you notice commercials, what are they doing? People are happy on the beach, jumping up and down because they found the
drug that makes them regular.
That's right. The drug that keeps them regular, or any of the things that people are selling. Now, those are subliminal messages, right? Because most of the time we're not thinking, oh, what are they showing us here? We're just taking it in passively, but the message is being received by the brain that if you get these things, you will be like those happy people jumping up and down on the beach, meaning your happiness will increase, which of course it doesn't. We know it doesn't, but we're continuously fed that message, and we're continuously feeding it to children, of course, from the very beginning. By the time a child is 5, 6 years old, they've seen hundreds of thousands of these messages that obtaining these toys, these games, these objects will lead to bliss.
Well, isn't it you were a child psychologist working with children and families, when the parent was giving the child everything it wanted, the child always wanted more. It was like, you don't have any boundaries with the baby, the child. It's like, okay, you can have 2 ice creams, can have 3 and then you keep giving that person that with the baby what they need. They learn to just keep consuming. Yeah. Instead of saying, you can have this now, or delayed satisfaction. Like they did those marshmallow tests with the kids. You can have 1 now, or you can wait and get 2. And most kids would take 1, take the 1 right away, because it's just our desire. We need to consume right away. We need to get it, that short-term hit we need to get. And that's really the destructive type of desire.
Yeah, that's right. So this desire is not bad in itself, of course, because it's helping us survive. It simply becomes destructive when we don't understand its nature.
When we haven't tamed it?
When basically? We haven't tamed it, we haven't learned to use it in a proper, appropriate way that helps people. Because ultimately we're hurting people by making them more attached to things. Not that there's anything wrong with things. Again, we need things and we need to learn how to use them. But when we give people the message that those things are going to make you happy, better, that's a recipe for disaster. So this is from the Gita, which is, everybody knows what the Bhagavad Gita is, but it says, when a person dwells on the pleasures of the senses, attraction for these things arises. From attraction arises desire, the lust for possession, and this leads to passion, to anger. From passion comes confusion of mind, the loss of remembrance, the forgetting of duty. From this loss comes the ruin of reason. And the ruin of reason leads to destruction.
So it sounds like a love relationship, you just lose your reason and you desire someone, and
it's part of it.
Yeah, you forget that, or you get it like infatuated with an idea, like obsessed with success, or obsessed with creating something, but it's more from that needy place.
That's right, because what happens is when you cultivate this continuously, because appetite is, as we know, is addictive, right? We see people get addicted to food, people get addicted to objects, to money, to anything. We can get addicted to almost anything because the mind will react to what we feed it. So if we're continuously feeding it these material objects and saying more will make you better, happier, more fulfilled, then the mind goes into that overdrive of just wanting more and wanting more and more. And like the genie, it's never satisfied, and it cannot be satisfied by these things.
Yeah.
So it
So you have to give them a tail to like.
It becomes destructive.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's the remedy that we see prescribed in the Upanishads and the Gita. It says you have to tame the mind. You have to tame that genie. And of course, we see yoga.
Well, you understand its nature. Is that
yes, that's
also?
right. Yeah. First of all, if it's a misperception.
That the desire is real and it's telling you something like instinctually, I really need to have that or I'm going to die, or I really need to find that relationship or I'm going to be alone forever, or that kind of believing those stories that we're telling ourselves that are going to make us happy.
Yeah, that would be the first principle, right? That you have to understand, what is it that I'm dealing with here? Because if you are believing that the external object has its independent existence, very much like the Buddha says, if you believe things arise independently of your mind, then you're mistaking, meaning you're misperceiving reality. The reality, as far as we know it, and this is, again, goes back to the very sophisticated understanding that the Upanishads present of consciousness and the mind, it says both you, the observer, and that object are one. In other words, there is no independent...
It's already inside of you, basically?
Yeah, it's kind of arising within a field. Both you as an individual observer and the object that you're looking at, and in this case, desiring, both are arising within one field of consciousness, one field of awareness. So that's the right perception. Because then you see the object for what it is, meaning it's arising within your mind, essentially. You're perceiving it within mind, and it exists within mind. So that lack of separateness then gives you the right relationship to that object, that there is no difference between you, your desire, and that object.
There's no difference between you and someone who's more successful, appears more has the appearance of being more successful than you, having more money than you, having a better relationship than you, though they are you. So to accept that, then you can actually experience it. And then, but it's tricky because here's what I see. I see a lot of, when The Secret came out 20 years ago, a lot of people started using these like ideas, this higher knowledge to feed their ego. Let me manifest a car. Let me manifest a relationship. Let me manifest the checks, write the checks down. And then it became more of a feeding that monster, the genie, versus really getting a true understanding of what's really happening here. I'm just going to use spiritual principles to create material desires. And so we have to be careful. We understand it and we want to create, but we don't want to create as still with that idea that if I create it, then I'm better. So let's talk about how we can use this to be creative. Like, how can we use desire to be creative? What would be required?
So if you correct the misperception, right? In other words, when you look at the world, and this is explained again in the Upanishads, when you look at the world and you think it's real, you're already on the wrong track. So it says, the simple fact is you're mistaking the unreal, meaning the world, for the real. You're thinking the world is real, and my thought of these objects, the things that exist in my head about them, my desire and my conceptualization of the world is unreal. So
the reason why when we think it's real, we actually pour our value into it. Like, this has more value than this, and the ego labels things in that dual nature. So when we desire something, we're giving it, like our mind is telling us that has more value than what I'm experiencing now. And that misperception of that external material thing has some kind of value. Like it's not, it's more real. Like it's real in connection to making me better. Like it has some kind of impact on me, like an effect on me.
Yeah, so let's define real and unreal first of all. So according to the Upanishads, so if the world is unreal, meaning it's an appearance, it's not saying it doesn't exist. It exists, but it exists very much like an experience, meaning like a mirage, like a dream. Yeah. So in a mirage, for example, you look out in the desert and you see water. You're experiencing seeing water, and if you don't understand the principle of a mirage, you're going to run towards that water. In other words, you're mistaking the unreal, the mirage, for the real. You're thinking that's real water. I'm going to run towards it and be saved, right? And drink the water. So that's the birth of suffering, of human suffering right there. Because we're thinking the world, which we are expecting to give us happiness through the objects, through the obtaining of sensory objects, the world is real. And when I get those objects, I'm going to be happy, right? And that's the initial misperception that we have to correct.
So the everyday person, we all want to have great relationships, have successful, business or careers. We want to have family and connections and friends. So how does just the everyday person, they don't have to sit in a cave, but how do they use desire in a creative way?
So now, if you understand what you're observing, right, that, there's this beautiful world full of incredible, beautiful things and objects and interesting things. Yeah. But its nature is illusory, meaning it's going to change. It's continuously morphing and changing into new forms and new things. So when you understand its nature, then you can act upon it or with it accordingly. So in that equation, what is real? Because the Upanishads are saying that the world is unreal, so what is real? What is the reality? So it says the world is an apparent reality. It's a reality, but it's apparent, meaning it's only appearing to you that way in this beautiful form. The reality is your awareness of that world. The awareness, the pure awareness in which both you and the world arise, that is the ultimate reality. That is the
true
absolute
reality is you're the witness watching you have this mind-body experience in this material world.
That's right. Now, that's a very different equation than the things of the world are going to give me happiness, because you're understanding the true nature of things, meaning the reality is the awareness in which both I and the world arise. So in that scenario, how can I use or how can I relate to these objects that I'm seeing? Because essentially,
seeing it in the right way, the correct way.
Yes, you're seeing them in the right context.
So it's almost like if you come from the ego, you're not aware of the witness or the pure awareness that we are. You're caught up in the world, and you're caught up in you're chasing the mirage in the desert.
Yes.
But when you connect with the witness, you have a different perspective, because you start to see that I have everything already. I'm connected to everything. And so if I'm connected to everything and I have this body, how do I use it to create versus how do I being caught up in I need these things and these little appearances and apparitions in the world. I need them to build up the ego. So what would someone create from the awareness? Like if you're the pure awareness and you have these desires, like earthly desires, how would that be different?
Yeah, the implications are really profound. And a lot of our work is really about exploring the implications of those principles. Because even neuroscience now and physics, especially quantum physics, are talking about the same principle, that this is how actually the universe comes into being. It is it appears to us, and it's created out of space and light, not out of material as people used to believe. And so the implications are really profound for the kind of work that we do, because that means one of the principles that the Upanishads talk about is that the mind is the one that is creating the meaning and the interaction with the apparent experience. So that apparent reality, they call it Maya.
And so the mind is kind of in the middle. There's Maya and then the awareness of the mind.
That's right. The human mind is the center, in a sense, between this external appearance that appears to go into infinity. As far as we know, space just continues infinitely.
And bends and turns and
And inwardly goes in infinitely as well, because there is no boundary to the inner experience of mind either, meaning to consciousness and the apparent reality are both one. That is the true understanding of non-dualism, that both the consciousness which produces the universe and the universe, the appearance of the universe, are one. Because if you think about it, if you have a dream, for example, and you ask, well, where do the objects in the dream exist? They exist in the mind, right? They're made out of mind stuff. So you cannot separate those objects from the stuff of mind, meaning awareness, consciousness. It's the same principle here. If the objects of the universe, planets, stars, galaxies, all these are essentially the same as awareness, the same as consciousness, you cannot separate them. They exist within and are made out of the same stuff as consciousness.
And so we are that consciousness.
We are that consciousness, and we are in it. So as far as creating, which is a great question, what do we do with that? What are the implications as far as us creating? The Upanishads simply say that you create through your perception, that the things you perceive, the things you think of, the things that you conceive of become your reality.
So the thoughts create your life.
Yes, because...
But you want to do it with a more conscious approach than just, my thoughts create my life, so I'm going to think positive so I can get the goodies. Great, right? So it's a subtle, how do we desire without being attached? How do we desire without thinking it's going to make us better?
Yeah, in the Gita, the conversation between Arjuna and Krishna addresses that question, right? Because Arjuna is essentially us in our ignorant state, thinking that these objects are separate from us, and the world is real, and therefore he's kind of asking the same questions, right? That we would. He's asking, well, if this is the case, why should I act in the first place, right? Why should I even act if my thoughts create my life? There's no need for action. But Krishna explains that no, you're bound to action. You have to take action. And if you notice, we're kind of locked into action.
We can't not, like, even if when we sleep, we're taking an action. We're
That's
breathing.
Right.
And so as long as we have a mind body,
you have to act.
Yeah, you have to. It's like you can't freeze.
So action can never be taken off the table.
So if you have to act,
then the question is, what do I do?
Yeah, what do I do?
Yeah.
How do I act?
How do I act?
I think the great way to end this is, if I had everything, what would I still create? Like if you had all the money in the world, the greatest love of your life, the beautiful children that all have like Ivy League, grades in school, and all these things that we all think are enlightened in our life and make us better. What if I had everything? What would I create from then? Or if everything was enough right now, what would I create just for the sake of creating? How could I be creative in the world? And, you know, if you think about artists, when they try to create to make money, they're not as creative. They're, you know, doing a project for someone. But when they create just because I want to paint, or someone who dances because they want to dance, someone who acts because they love acting, someone who helps other people because it's just their nature. That's it's that free of that desire where it's a higher desire. It's like not getting anything in return, but you're doing it for the act itself.
Very much so. So that's the Krishna's response is he says, do your duty with non-attachment.
Yeah.
In other words, if you have to act, we are, let's say, compelled to act because we have a mind body, then we should do our duty. Meaning the role that we're playing in life, do it to the best possible way, in the best possible way that you can do it, but be non-attached. And that means you're not taking the action to get the goodies. Again,
or to build your own ego.
Yeah, again, because the goodies, the result are, again, illusory, meaning they're not external to you. They're already kind of part of your awareness, part of yourself. So there's no need to get attached to getting these results.
And we're going to do other episodes. We're going to talk about karma. We're going to talk about non-attachment. We're going to talk about the rat race, how to get out of that rat race. We have a lot of topics to cover, but we're touching on non-attachment here, but we're going to do a full episode on that as well.
The problem with the rat race is that even if you win, you're still a rat.
Yeah, that's great. So we are excited about this series. I know this is a lot. The way Eastern philosophy is very different than our traditional conditioning. So it takes time to really understand what they're really saying. So you can hear this 100 times and you may still just get a glimpse of it. And the more you learn it. So there's never a time where you feel like, oh, I figured it all out. So because it's so opposite of how we're conditioned to perceive and experience the world, but it is really the doorway to freedom. And so I invite you to think about what do I want? What's that desire? And what if I already had it? Like, why would I do it not just out of lack? How would I create just for the sake of creating? And and we'll hopefully get some comments below. If you want to subscribe on our YouTube channel, you can click on the button on this video, or if you're listening to our podcast, make sure you subscribe and don't miss any episodes of this series coming up for the summer to broaden your mind and lighten your soul.
We'll see you next time.
All right.
Stay well.
Take care, everyone. Have a great day.